The initiation of the soul, why suffering is the door to awakening. Let's begin with something no one wants to say out loud. The spiritual path will break you. Not once, not twice, but again and again until there's nothing left inside you but truth. No masks, no noise, no identity you can hide behind. Only the raw, trembling, sacred core of who you've always been. The irony is, most people think spirituality is about peace. But that's just the reward. The path itself. It's war. A war within, between who you were and who you're becoming. Between the ego that wants to control and the soul that wants to surrender. Between the self you perform and the self that is real.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
There are 5 breakdowns that every true spiritual person must face, not as punishments, but as initiations. These moments are not failures. They are sacred ruptures. They're how the universe chisels away everything false until your essence is finally free. And if you've ever felt like your life was falling apart, like nothing made sense anymore, like you were dying from the inside out, you aren't broken. You're awakening. You've stepped into the fire, and now the fire is doing its work. The first breakdown is the breakdown of identity. This one hurts more than anything else. Because who are we without our roles? Our names, our careers, our relationships, our carefully crafted image? We spend our early lives building a version of ourselves we think will be safe in the world. We become what others need us to be. We wear masks so convincingly that we forget we're even wearing them. But then something happens. A loss, a betrayal, a moment of stillness so sharp it slices through everything. And suddenly, all those roles begin to fall away. You no longer know who you are. And that's terrifying until you realize that what's collapsing isn't you. It's who you thought you had to be. In this breakdown, the ego screams. It resists. It will do anything to survive. It will try to rebuild the old story. But if you're brave, if you let yourself not know for a while, something miraculous happens. Silence becomes a teacher. Emptiness becomes a canvas. And slowly, your real self emerges. Not the self shaped by trauma or expectation, but the one that existed before the world told you who to be. Ask yourself this: if I could no longer be who people think I am, who would I become? The second breakdown is the breakdown of belonging. And this one cuts deep, because it often comes after the first. Once you shed the identity that kept you safe, you find that your old circles no longer feel like home. You look around and realize, I don't belong here anymore. You feel out of place in your family, out of sync with your friends, maybe even alien in your own relationship. It's lonely, and it's meant to be. This is the sacred isolation, the cocoon, the void between who you were and who you're becoming. It's where the soul goes to realign. You're not being abandoned, you're being upgraded. The frequency you're carrying can no longer survive in environments that are misaligned. So the universe begins to move people, places, and things out of your life not to punish you, but to purify you. Because you can't hold your full power in spaces that ask you to dim it. But here's the part most people miss. You must not rush to fill the void. So many spiritual people sabotage this phase by grabbing at anything that feels familiar. They go back to old friends, old habits, old versions of themselves just to escape the loneliness. But the loneliness is sacred. It's the silence where your new tribe begins to hear your signal. It's the space where your new path begins to form. You're not losing your life. You're losing your limitations. So I ask you, are you willing to be misunderstood in order to be real? Because if you are, your energy will begin to attract mirrors, not masks. Real ones. Soul family. People who don't just tolerate your truth, but ignite it. But first you must stop seeking belonging in places you've already outgrown. The third breakdown is the breakdown of belief. This one often comes suddenly, like a storm in the middle of a clear day. Everything you thought you knew about God, the universe, life, death, it all starts to unravel. You begin to question the teachers you once followed, the dogmas you once preached, the truths you once clung to. You stop nodding along in spiritual circles just to fit in. You stop repeating mantras that no longer resonate. You start to feel your own truth instead of borrowing someone else's. And in that moment, you feel lost. It's like the ground beneath your soul disappears. But that's when you realize you were standing on someone else's path. This is when you begin to walk your own. When you stop seeking outside yourself and start listening to the voice within. When you stop chasing the light and start becoming the fire. You may lose your community. You may lose your certainty. But you gain something sacred, authenticity. This is the breakdown that leads to sovereignty. You stop outsourcing your divinity. You stop needing approval from gurus, from books, from doctrine. You begin to live in direct communication with Source. You become your own channel, your own compass, your own sacred authority. But it demands something rare, the willingness to not know, to live in the mystery, to trust your inner knowing, even when it contradicts everything you've been taught. So I ask you, what belief are you still holding on to because it makes you feel safe, even if it makes you small? That belief is your gate. Release it, and you will rise. The fourth breakdown is the breakdown of control. This one is brutal because it strikes at the core of our survival programming. We believe often unconsciously that if we can just plan enough, prepare enough, predict enough, we'll be safe. We try to control outcomes, people, timelines, emotions. But the spiritual path doesn't work that way. The deeper you go, the more you realize you're not in control, you're in collaboration. This breakdown often comes through chaos. Your plans fall apart. The timeline shatters. What you were sure would happen doesn't. And suddenly, you're faced with the void of uncertainty. It feels like failure. But it's really initiation. The universe is pulling you into a deeper relationship, not with your mind, but with the mystery. You begin to learn something no book can teach: how to feel your path instead of forcing it. You start living by resonance. You begin to trust your intuition more than your logic. You let go of the need to know what's next and start focusing on what's now. And in that surrender, you find something astonishing: peace. Not the peace that comes from control, but the peace that comes from trust. The peace of knowing that your soul is leading and your only job is to listen. The death of the old self: why your greatest pain is the birth of your power. The fifth and most soul-shattering breakdown is the death of the old self. I speak to you now not as a teacher, not even as a guide, but as someone who has crawled through this fire, naked and screaming, more than once. This is the death no one warned you about. And yet, it is the one that truly begins the spiritual life. Because every transformation you've ever heard about, every phoenix story, every rebirth is not symbolic. It's literal. You will feel like you are dying, and in a way you are, but not your body, not your spirit. What dies is the version of you that was never yours to carry. This death doesn't come all at once. It comes in layers. First, the surface falls away: your habits, your distractions, the things that kept you numb. Then, your attachments begin to dissolve. The relationships that were based on your old identity can no longer hold. Then, the most terrifying part, your dreams begin to dissolve. Not because they were wrong, but because they were too small. Designed by the version of you that was still surviving, still performing, still begging for permission to exist. When that self begins to die, it feels like there's nothing left. No purpose, no direction, no ground beneath your feet. You cry not because you're weak, but because the soul is shedding centuries of lies in a few short months. You walk into the mirror and see a stranger. You speak and don't recognize your voice. You try to go back to the things that once brought you joy, and they taste like ash in your mouth. You feel like you're failing, but you're not. You are dissolving. And that's exactly what the soul needs. Because the real you, the timeless, untamed, infinite, you can only emerge once the old shell has cracked. And cracks only appear under pressure. This is why the breakdown is sacred. It's the holy excavation, the divine demolition. You are not losing your life. You're losing the illusion that hid your light. This is when most people quit the path. They think the breakdown means they're cursed, or lost, or broken beyond repair. But if you've made it here, if you're still breathing, still listening, there's something inside you that can't be destroyed. Something ancient, something eternal. That's your soul. And for the first time, it's no longer whispering. It's roaring. It's saying, let the old self die. I'm ready to lead now. But let me be honest. The death of the old self is not just emotional, it's energetic. Your very frequency begins to shift. You start to repel what once attracted you. You start to attract what once terrified you. You feel like you're being rewired. Because you are. Your nervous system is recalibrating to hold more light, more integrity, more power. This is not symbolic. This is biological. This is spiritual science in action. And it's painful. Your body may ache. You may feel exhausted, heavy, confused. But don't run. Don't numb. Don't go back to sleep. You're in the birth canal of your own evolution. So how do you survive this death? You stop resisting. You surrender. You sit in the ashes and say, I trust this fire. Even though it burns, I trust it. You let your grief speak. You let your rage scream. You let your silence echo. And in that brave permission, the new self begins to form not as an idea, but as a frequency. You don't become something new. You become what you were before the world told you to be anything else. This is where everything shifts. You stop chasing healing as a goal. You start living as healing itself. You realize that your presence, this strange, raw, radiant presence, is the medicine. You no longer try to be spiritual. You are spiritual because you've died and come back. You've walked through fire and emerged with eyes that can see in the dark. And now, you're no longer afraid of pain. You understand it. You respect it. You use it. But here's the twist. This death never really ends. It's cyclical. Every time we level up on this path, another version of us must fall away. The ego tries to sneak back in through the spiritual door. It will try to wear robes, speak mantras, and quote scriptures. But you'll know the difference now. You'll feel it in your bones. When something isn't aligned, your whole being will scream. And this is when you become dangerous to the matrix, because you can no longer be manipulated by fear, control, or praise. You are no longer seeking anything. You are being everything. Let me ask you something that will stay with you. What part of you are you still trying to save, even though it's already dead? That's the part blocking your next evolution. Grieve it, honor it, but let it go. You don't need to carry corpses into the new earth. And now that you've walked through these 5 breakdowns, the collapse of identity, the loss of belonging, the unraveling of belief, the surrender of control, and the death of the old self, you are no longer a seeker. You are a carrier, a transmitter, someone who doesn't just talk about awakening, but is the awakening. Every room you enter changes. Every person you speak to feels it. Not because you're trying to be anything, but because you've become nothing but truth. But this is only the beginning. Because now you must live as the awakened one. You must walk through a world still asleep and not lose your glow. You must hold the line when others fall back into comfort. You must lead without needing followers. And you must learn to master the art of rebuilding from the ashes of your own becoming. Rebuilding from ruin. How to live as a fully awakened force in a sleeping world. Now that you've broken down, died, and come back to life, the question becomes, how do you live in a world that hasn't awakened yet? How do you walk through cities full of distractions, through conversations layered with masks, through systems built on fear, and still hold your truth? This is the final test of the awakened soul. Not just to awaken, but to remain awake in a world that profits from your sleep. This is where your greatest initiation becomes your greatest responsibility, because you no longer get to live unconsciously. You no longer get to pretend that what you do, say, or radiate is meaningless. You now understand energy. You now understand frequency. And everything you touch, everything you build, everything you allow becomes part of your legacy. So how do you move through this world with power and purpose without becoming bitter, arrogant, or exhausted? You begin by mastering the art of non-reaction. This doesn't mean being passive. It means being precise. You no longer waste energy trying to wake people up who are committed to staying asleep. You no longer argue to be understood. You understand that your inner peace is not a performance, it's your anchor. You don't fight every battle. You choose the ones that matter. You don't speak to prove your wisdom. You speak when your words are sacred offerings. You don't shine to be seen. You shine because that's what you are. But here's the paradox: the more awakened you become, the less you need to convince anyone of anything. You become a silent revolution. Your presence speaks louder than your voice. Your energy does the work your words never could. People feel it. They don't know why, but they feel safer around you, more honest, more seen, sometimes more triggered. And that's all part of your role now, not to be liked, not to be understood, but to be true. Truth is uncomfortable. Truth is clarifying. Truth is the medicine that burns before it heals. And that's what you carry now. So how do you rebuild from ruin? You begin with your daily life. You stop waiting for the big moment, the perfect opportunity, the grand stage. You understand that how you brush your teeth, how you speak to your partner, how you show up in traffic, how you spend your money is your practice. You make your life your temple. You treat your body like sacred ground. You build relationships that are mirrors, not distractions. You create systems, financial, relational, emotional, that are aligned with your soul, not your survival wounds. You stop outsourcing your power. You stop asking others to validate what you already know. You trust your intuition like it's your oldest friend, because it is. You listen to your body like it's a holy text, because it is. You treat your triggers like teachers, your emotions like guides, your discomfort like sacred fire. You stop trying to escape the human experience and start mastering it. You don't bypass pain, you learn to alchemize it. You don't run from the shadow, you learn to dance with it. You don't just meditate to feel peaceful, you live as peace, walking through a world in chaos. But here's the key: you don't isolate yourself on a mountaintop, waiting for the world to catch up. You go back in. You return to the marketplace. You walk through the matrix, but this time with different eyes. You see the game, but you're no longer a player. You're a creator. You use your gifts to shift culture. You use your presence to anchor new timelines. You use your pain as a blueprint to help others survive theirs. You become a living transmission of what's possible when a soul remembers its power. And yes, it gets heavy. Yes, you will still grieve. Yes, some days you'll want to go back to sleep. But you won't, because you can't. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't pretend it's not there. Once you've tasted your soul, nothing else satisfies. That hunger for meaning, for alignment, for depth it never leaves. And that's a gift, a compass, a fire that keeps you forging forward, even when the path is unclear. So what do you do when the world doesn't understand you? You stop trying to be understood. You focus on being integral. You don't ask, do they like me? You ask, am I aligned? You don't ask, is this easy? You ask, is this true? You don't try to fit into a crumbling system, you build a new one. You don't wait for the world to become kinder, you become the kindness. You don't wait for the world to become just, you embody justice. You don't protest the dark, you become such a force of presence that the dark has nowhere left to hide. But here's what may surprise you. The more you live this way, the more magic begins to return. Not the fantasy kind, the real kind. Synchronicity, flow, deep, soul-wrenching love. A peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. A joy that has nothing to do with pleasure and everything to do with truth. You begin to align with the rhythm of existence. You begin to feel the pulse of the cosmos in your chest. You begin to remember what it means to be fully alive. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll become the very guide you once prayed for. Not as a guru, not as a savior, but as a living example of what it looks like to endure every breakdown, to die to every illusion, to rise again and again, and to love anyway. To create anyway, to speak anyway, to live anyway. So I leave you with this question. If the world never changes, will you still choose to become everything your soul came here to be? Because that's the real initiation. That's the final choice. When you live not for applause, not for validation, not for reward, but because being true to your soul is the only thing that makes you feel alive. You have made it through the fire. You have faced the mirror. Now, become the flame.